Hi there. Welcome to Mushroom Hour. Today on Mushroom Hour, we're excited to chat with Scott Stimpson. Best known for his incredibly popular social media accounts, Woodland Cravings, Scott has been foraging for over 8 years across 18 different states in the U.S. Growing up in Broward County, Florida, Scott was immersed in a diverse culture and developed a love of foods from all over. His love of food naturally led to a love of cultivation and appreciating the culinary abundance that is all around us in nature. His true passion for food really didn't take off, though, until food forests became his reality. His senior research project at Florida Gulf Coast University led to the development of a half-acre food forest that is still a thriving student initiative to this day. His passion for agroforestry, permaculture, foraging, mushrooms, all led him to the mushroom mecca that is the Pacific Northwest. Now, as a student of working with the land in all of these varied disciplines, Scott's lifestyle revolves around a symbiosis with the land, and he is keenly aware of a responsibility to act as a shepherd of our earth. As part of his great work, Scott shares his knowledge about permaculture techniques and ethical foraging with others both online and in person. For anyone who follows Scott's work, it's clear his passion and gratitude for nature's culinary bounty are present in equal measure. I'm excited to learn Scott's perspective on this sacred relationship that we have with the land that provides for us, and maybe how we can satiate our own woodland cravings while giving back as much as we receive. Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
In talking with you before the show, I think there are some unique viewpoints that you brought up when it comes to foraging and permaculture. And I know a lot of people follow you on Instagram, TikTok, and all that good stuff, but there's a lot of depth here and a ton of knowledge. So I'm excited to get into it with you. But I guess to kick things off, I do like to hear about where people come from. I think you have an interesting story, even prefacing it with saying Florida, Broward County, it's where a lot of Cops episodes are shot. So there's like this interesting, vivid backdrop of how you developed kind of a love of nature, food, mushrooms, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I really came from a diverse place, very different from most of North America, especially once you go to South Florida, you're part of the Caribbean at that point. So where I grew up, it's the heat of the tropics, hot all the time, humid all the time. And then I moved to the Pacific Northwest, and now I'm cool and chilly and not so much sun, and then any bit of heat, so many folks are like, man, it's so hot here. And I just stay quiet in my head sometimes. Yeah, Florida's a really unique ecosystem. It's a very special place where it's kind of the joke of the nation in many ways. No matter where I've ever traveled to, Florida is the joke. So
you think that's fair?
Yes and no. Kind of, a lot of it is true, but you have to know those secret places. You have to know how to find the beauty. So it's almost like being on a treasure hunt, being in that state. Because here you come to the Pacific Northwest, the beauty is everywhere. Everyone knows where to go and find it. You go to Florida, you have to really be investigative. You have to really kind of dive into research and look at maps and look at landscapes and understand, all right, am I surrounded by water? Am I going to be able to get through this area? So Florida is a very different beast of an animal in many ways.
So Florida obviously has its influence on the soul of Scott and kind of how you developed your relationship with nature. But, there's often this distinction with a lot of foragers. Are you interested in everything? Are you interested just in the gourmet side? And it sounds like your passion really got stoked by the gourmet side and about food. What were some of those early influences that just made you fall in love with food? And then how did that lead to the development of that relationship with nature?
Yeah, so food was huge in my family. My mother's side is all Italians. My dad's side was mixed American, a little bit of everything, but my mom, all blood, all Italian. Grandma's house, we're peeling potatoes, blanching tomatoes, throwing lobsters into the big hot boiling water, like all the scary stuff as a kid, but the food was just incredible, these massive meals. Where I grew up, though, my family was one of the few white American families. Everybody else was from the Caribbean.
Mm.
So I was around this diverse food all the time, and it was incredible. I mean, my neighbors were from Puerto Rico, Jamaica, Haiti, Guyana, which is in South America, and most folks don't even know of this country, Trinidad and Tobago. So, Caribbean spices. I grew up knowing that curry wasn't one dish. Curry meant many dishes. There's many types of curries all around the world, but that word curry is such a blanket spice idea for many people.
Right.
So just this explosion of flavor that I was introduced to from my early childhood, until the age of 18 years old, I had food around me. I mean, it was just such a treat. And then going into college, I didn't go to college to do food studies at first. I went to college to try and be an oral surgeon. I wanted to make money,
Yeah, yeah.
because that's what I was supposed to do. But I just had no passion or drive, and it was all about the money thing. And so I left that program. Then I went back to marine science, which is what I studied in high school. And I did so much research in marine science.
Wow.
It is
Okay.
kind of the untold story of me in many ways. I moved into environmental stuff because, all right, I'm in Florida. I like the environment. I like the outdoors. But I didn't know food was going to be my focus in college. That had not happened until I moved into a house because I needed a home with a yard for Puka, my dog, that many of you may know or have seen photos of. And this was the introduction to food for me, was moving into this house, because I go into the backyard and I see a garden and I'm like, wow, I have to take care of all this. What are all of these things? I don't know what these are. I'm sitting in my environmental GIS class in college, and my peer is talking to me, and I said to her, I moved into this house with all these weird tropical plants, and I'm in this neighborhood. She's like, wait a minute, I think you moved into my friend's house, like old house. After more conversation, realized that I moved into the exact house that these people had moved out of. They were also college students. They were beginning their journey in permaculture. So I became friends with them, and I got introduced to permaculture because of these friends and started learning. And then right there, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to grow food. I wanted to be part of this idea of knowing where our food comes from, understanding the food system in the US. And I went to this school that was all about environmental sustainability, but nowhere in our education or in classes were we being taught about food. There was no campus garden. But how can this school have this environmental initiative and sustainability initiative, but food isn't even part of that topic anywhere? So that became our drive at the university, is starting the backyard farmers and going to each other's yards and growing fruits and vegetables and learning not what we find in our grocery stores, learning what, when you put your finger on the globe of the earth and you rotate that globe and you see what latitude line you're at in South Florida, all of a sudden you start bumping into Caribbean islands, Southeast Asia, and then other places, Central and South America, are within those latitude lines of subtropical to tropical areas.
Yeah.
So all of our research focused on things that people could grow in these ecosystems outside of our state. So then it was all this new knowledge, this new food. And then all of a sudden I'm brought back to my childhood, growing up where I grew up. And these things were being grown everywhere already. They just told them different things that I was reading online. I grew up calling moringa leaf. Everybody seems to know moringa these days, a big superfood. That's what I learned in college. And then I'm like, wait a minute, this is Saijan. I called this Saijan growing up because my neighbors from Guyana grew this all the time. I was eating moringa for years as a teenager, not even realizing that it's the superfood that was the craze when I was in college. Moringa, everybody grow moringa leaf. Like, it's so good for you. The journey began there because I moved into a house for my dog.
How lucky you got to inherit someone's kind of legacy of permaculture and then build on that. And then this program at Florida Gulf Coast, I mean, it sounds like that's still going strong. Do you still have any involvement there? Have you followed up at all with where the program is now? And do you see programs like that? I mean, is that something that should be at every college in your opinion, or at...
every college university would benefit from us having something like this around the world, not just in
Right.
the nation, but around the world. I think that the implications of learning how to grow food and retraining ourselves as a society, an international society, to have a sense of agroforestry or agrocentric communities is very
Mm.
healthy for communities. Also, reducing carbon footprints and getting into the environmental side of things too. But the education and knowledge, I had not really known much of our food system at all until getting involved in all of this. And as for what's going on now, the students are still involved. When I started the project with my team, we were all getting close to our graduation. It was like the last year and a half of all of us being in school. The four of us were just hustling to get this project going and rolling. And a campus garden was a talk for many years at the school, but nothing ever came to fruition. Then permaculture, how are we going to sell permaculture to like our student government to get a Senate bill to pay for this?
Right.
We had to go through this really formal process of getting funding to start this program because we're students. When you're a student at a university, by the way, when you're a student at a university, this is good. You have so much power. You have so much access to funding if you organize correctly, because your student government is given so much money that they get to choose what it's used for, but it's only used for student initiatives, not by professors or by faculty. This is for your student body to utilize. So if you can organize and get enough people that are on your email list or in your student organization, you can get funding from your student government to fund your projects. And that's what we did.
The reason I asked the question is because I think this is something that should be at every university. So it's really inspiring to hear that, almost your blueprint for getting organized, getting passionate about this, and it's eminently attainable. And that's something that I think causes a lot of different issues in modern human societies are, how divorced we are from the systems that sustain us, food being one of the biggest. Everybody has to eat, and we all know how unsustainable it is in its current format and how it depletes soil, how it hurts ecosystems. So bringing a focus to permaculture, I mean, it sounds like it did this for you. It inspired you to kind of go in this deep dive into the natural world in general, but it ignites so much passion in people and inspires people so much because it's this reconnection with something as primal as food and with the natural world. So I guess how did that then progress to you jumping around in the woods and hunting wild plants and wild mushrooms and everything else?
When I left the university, I went and became a park ranger.
Mm.
And I was in the state of Florida on an 11,000 acre preserve where it was just my boss and I, and we had to manage these 11,000 acres as best as we could. Invasive species removal, I had to do a lot of things. I did wildland firefighting. I burned acres and acres of forest for health purposes, not to just burn a forest down,
Right.
prescribed burns. But then thinking while I'm out in these woods, I'm like, well, all these plants are out here. I know all these, but what did the indigenous use these plants for? Why are they so important? What's protected? What is medicinal? What was being eaten? Because I had already developed this interest in growing my food. And then I learned that the food that I'm growing in a lot of these places around the world were things that they had gone foraging for out in the forests. And then they bring them back to their villages and they spit the seeds out the window, or they throw the seeds out in their piles, and the seeds start growing in these little villages. And then they start planting these fruit trees and nuts and herbs around their villages, essentially creating this permaculture design in your society. So what can we do here in Florida and start introducing more native species into this permaculture design that are useful into your home landscape of permaculture? We can go to the forest and take the resource, but you can also grow those things on your home landscape to bring the food to you. So you don't have to remove from a forest. You can let it thrive out there and then bring it to thrive at your home as well. So the park ranger position really kind of made the next step for me to start looking at things, kind of blending yourself with your ecosystem a little bit more and
Yeah.
knowing your surroundings a little bit more.
And I
And
love the connection you just made between foraging and permaculture. That idea that early people's foraging for things, spitting out seeds. I mean, and that's the first start of agroforestry or permaculture.
Absolutely. And that alone was the reason foraging became such a big deal to me, because of the resources are there.
Yeah.
They're out there. So how do you get them to where you need to be? Because some of these, these places, they had to travel maybe 10, 50, 100 miles to get some of these food resources. So if they can not have to do those big, epic traveling or migrations or to go to a different area, it's really where the agroforestry came in, and permaculture became part of that was a way of life. It wasn't called permaculture.
Right.
Not until someone put a name permaculture on it did it become this thing that was never new. It was always there in our history. And the most important thing with the permaculture is yes, of course you're going to utilize plants that are not native to your area. That's still part of it, because we're going to grow fruit trees, we're going to grow nut trees. Right. But when you incorporate your native species into your landscape of permaculture, things that can be useful again for food or medicine, but doesn't even have to be good for those, you can bring in your native pollinators to come to your landscape to then be part of that ecosystem, because your native pollinators are extremely important. One, for the native ecology, but also they're going to come and potentially pollinate the other plants and flowers that you might have. And some flowers, I will remember one in Florida, was the fruit that comes from any of the Annona genus species, which tend to be your guanabana or soursop, as they call it in Asia, or in some Caribbean islands, like I said, they call it guanabana. There's the custard apples and sugar apples, and atimoyas and rollinia. These are all Annona, is the genus for these. They have a really unique flower. And the flower, what we can relate to is, in the US, is the pawpaw.
Sure.
The pawpaw is the most tropical looking fruit that we grow natively to the US in North America. And the flowers of the pawpaw are very similar looking at times to the Annonas, and they get compared to Annonas in many ways for their custardy texture. They don't look alike, but they do have similarities. But the custardy fruit inside, I've never had a pawpaw, this is what I've heard, but I've eaten many Annonas in South Florida. So that was always the comparison for foraging for me, was to one day I hope that I get to find pawpaws out in the wild. And I've looked, I just haven't been successful yet when I was on the eastern side of the United States. The great thing is that when you're thinking of permaculture, it is to, of course, tie together what is useful food that I can grow, what is native to my area, and blending those two worlds to create that cohesion of the two places.
An important component of this that is basing it in your native ecology, even if you bring things from outside, having a firm core of kind of native ecology that keeps it grounded in that bigger surrounding ecosystem, right? Because everything's kind of ecosystems within ecosystems. So you want to tie it all together. So, as I talk to more and more people, I'm starting to know what that word means for me. And it's important to know what these words mean if I'm going to use them so much. Now, when I used to watch your social media, the things you were finding were quite alien for me out here on the West Coast of the United States, out in Northern California. So maybe if you can take us on a little safari into Florida, what are some of the unique wild plants? And I'm especially interested to hear about wild mushrooms that were part of the population in Florida, because it's a wild food landscape I don't know much about.
So when it comes to the plants, one of my favorite plants to forage for is the genus Smilax. And we don't get Smilax, I think it's west of the Mississippi River. You really don't start finding Smilax anymore. That is known, common name is greenbrier. So on the eastern side of the country, there's a lot of greenbrier or Smilax species, different species for the Smilax genus. And we have these just big, thick-rooted Smilax that come up about the thickness of asparagus. And right in the springtime, you can just pull the tips off, and they're everywhere. You go into some landscapes, and It's all over the place. It's very easy to identify, has these big, beautiful, long tendrils to them. Some of them are going to be green, some of them are green and red in color. They almost remind me, if the Japanese knotweed was more of a vine, it would kind of be kind of like a vining Japanese knotweed that is not hollow in the inside.
Okay, I've got a good mental picture, and I'm pretty sure I've seen you harvesting those on your stories over the years.
Another plant is something called the hog plum, which grows in a lot of like scrub habitats, which are protected. So it's not a place that you can typically go foraging, but hog plums have been planted in other landscapes. You got to wait until it gets extremely ripe on the tree. They have these massive thorns to them, but they'll get soft and squishy like a ripe plum does, and that's when you can harvest them. If you do it too early, they are extremely astringent. It'll make your mouth pucker and feel like it's drying out. So like it is very tannic. The great thing about Florida is that because it has been this huge shipping location internationally, as seaports and different things coming from the seas,
right?
The tropical fruit and subtropical fruit that are planted in Florida, it's everywhere. Even in those rural landscapes, or if you're in the forest, you'll find citrus trees sometimes. Not because the citrus is native, but because birds or animals move with fruit. They drop seeds in different parts, and you'll find a mango tree randomly in this. Well, how did this mango tree get here? Oh, the mango must have fallen down this river, and then an animal pulled it up and put it over here. So we have these tropical fruits that are showing up as feral trees in different areas, and those are some of the best finds.
That sounds like a dream. I love mangoes. To stumble upon a mango tree would be just like the ultimate for me out wild food foraging.
It is really special when it happens, and sometimes you'll stumble upon a tree. There's one in particular that I have that I really enjoy to go to that was probably planted about 100 years ago, back during the pioneer times, back when the lands were being started and cultivated, but now it's just this open field, and there's no home there. There's nothing left, and there's other trees growing, and then there's this orchard of mango trees. Not an actual established orchard, but it's just, looks like a little forest of mango trees, where 3 of the 4 mango trees don't taste so good. But then there's one tree that is it is the best mangoes I've ever had in my life. I've eaten probably 30 to 40 different varieties of mangoes that I've tasted.
What? There are 30 or 40 different varieties. That's one thing in the supermarket. There's like 2, right? You have the yellow skin and then the traditional green and red skin, but you've had 40.
Yeah, and there's more than 100 varieties of mangoes. There's research centers, there's different kinds of farms in Florida. I mean, that's kind of where I did a lot of my undergraduate research and stuff like that. So mangoes can have such a flavor profile, and that's why you hear arguments, Thai mangoes are better, or no, the mangoes from Haiti are better, or the mangoes from here are better. So just like we do with our apples, or we do with any of our other fruits here, and there's so many varieties of apples. So the cool thing about Florida is that you get access to, when you're foraging, citrus, starfruit, mangoes, lychee trees, longan trees, jaboticaba, like all these really unique things that'll just sometimes be in those landscapes when you're out foraging, and then you've struck gold.
Because of that, is foraging popular in Florida? Is there a pretty big foraging community? Even if it's not like the trendy thing necessarily, but just a matter of fact, what people do?
Not at all. And that's not just for the fact of it not being popular. I'm sure it would be popular, but there is a safety aspect to foraging in Florida as well.
Alligators, crocodiles?
I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about humans.
The most dangerous.
Because what if you wander on someone's private property? What if you end up in a place where someone doesn't want you near there or in that area? So just a different environment that you have to forage on. You have to think of a lot more human factor, because gators are scary, but I grew up with gators. Gators are going to typically take off if they see you. We have snakes, but you just have to know your poisonous ones and not step on one. So there's a lot of knowledge that comes with your animals, but you got to take another effect other things, because some of the lands that I would go foraging on, maybe I should not have been there. So you have to tread lightly. There's not a lot of places to go do it in Florida, because most of the lands are, 1, either developed, 2, underwater, or 3, right against private property, and you have to know where private property starts and ends and be very aware of that. And then not only that, there's also a lot of protected lands. All of the coastline of Florida, if there's any native plants on the coast, it is all 100% protected. There are the sea grapes that are native, but they're protected because they're right at the beaches. You cannot go harvesting them. So you have to really know what the local laws are when it comes to restriction or access. Highly foraged and great beneficial areas to go for are typically where you'll find big homes planted instead. The coastline is very much inundated with a lot of houses. And you go inland and it's a lot of farm and agriculture. So there's a lot of open lands, but a lot of the lands that are accessible for people tend to have more swamps on them.
Tell us a little bit about the mushroom scene in Florida, what you find, maybe what the season is, all that good stuff.
Florida is a diverse place for fungal species. It's just there's not the love or care to get to know them that there was out here in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
There is so many fungi, and you get them throughout the year in many different areas. You can find edible ones on occasion, and I think that there's a lot more edible ones out there. It's just that the proper research or identification has not been done, or edibility tests have not been done, especially with a lot of boletes. There's a lot of boletes that show up at times in South Florida. I've tasted a few. A lot of them taste bitter, but I know sometimes you can cook it or some might not be that great, but I'm not going to chance it by actually consuming it because I don't know better. And I'm really big on like not eating certain genuses of mushrooms either. Like I know that there are safe and edible Amanita, but I don't even eat those safe and edible Amanita because there's so many other safe mushrooms for me to eat. I'm just not as adventurous in that regard. I might seem very adventurous, but I do take caution in well-advised areas. Some mushrooms that I think are really cool in Florida. One is the Lactarius indigo. You know, it's this bright blue mushroom, and it's just so cool when you get to find them. Normally, you'll just see like one or two. If you get lucky and you're in the right ecosystem, you'll just see the floor covered in a whole bunch of them. They're just everywhere.
Like out of a dream. Wow.
It's really special to witness it. It's really, really cool to just see these little blue mushrooms popped up everywhere. Because it does stand out in the environment as well. It's not like it's a blue mushroom sitting with something green. It's a blue mushroom in usually a brown environment. And fun one is that chanterelles are in Florida. That's a really good one to know. You don't get as much in South Florida. It's more central and northern Florida with chanterelles. Lots of oyster mushrooms. You know, we get oysters, absolutely. Ganoderma. So much Ganoderma in Florida. So much Ganoderma. Mind you, that I'm not sure of actually the specific species that Florida had for Ganoderma or for the oysters, but I do know that there are the reishi-esque, varnished, red-capped Ganoderma in Florida. There's also the artist conch-looking Ganodermas. And then your mushrooms, you have, you know, the white oysters, but you'll also have, at times, it's very rare, very, very rare, and I could not believe it when it showed up out of the blue in my permaculture backyard when I was in college, and I didn't inoculate anything, were the pink oyster mushrooms.
I've never seen those in the wild.
Pleurotus jamor, I think that's what those are. I was just blown. I could not believe it. I didn't plant them. There's like, where did these spores come from? How did they get here? Is there a native pink oyster in Florida that's just not really seen? I don't know. Really don't know how to answer it, but I had pink oysters that showed up in my garden, growing in the mulch, like just out of the mulch. I used to grab mulch from the community mulch pile, and it was a mix of things. So it could have been on any kind of substrate.
My mind goes to, you know, whether there are some endemic species or genetically different species lurking in a tropical area like Florida that does have so much crossover when you think of tourists bringing in spores. And I'm sure there's an absolutely fascinating fungal landscape that is multiple life's work of someone out there. But with this wild food community not being so huge, how did you really get your legs under you when it came to foraging? I mean, what was your path like? How did you start? And maybe some of those resources can be useful for other people.
The biggest resource was actually the internet for me. I'll be quite frank and say the internet and Instagram.
Yeah.
I was using these to learn what people were finding by following hashtags and paying attention to certain hashtags, not so much paying attention to accounts,
Mm,
but paying attention to hashtags. That's how I learned stuff.
smart.
I also was, of course, getting books and things that I can read as resources, connecting with other foragers, which are really hard to find in Florida. But what I did was I got just connected with other people doing permaculture. And people doing permaculture typically had contacts or someone that they knew that maybe did a little foraging.
Right.
The best experience you'll ever get is hands-on, direct, one-on-one education from your elders, from your peers, from anybody that's teaching something that you want to know in general. That one-on-one is going to be the most valuable. So that's where I've received the most information and have the fastest understanding of it. For Florida, there's not many mushroom books. There's one, I have it right here. It's called Common Florida Mushrooms, James Kimbrough. It's an older book. Could probably use some serious updates, but I mean, this is your kind of good starting basic Florida mushrooms book. I don't know if anything's been put out since the time that I purchased this.
A lot of people are finding that nowadays. I think that the internet, Instagram can be really invaluable resources as this community grows. But I'm with you that if you are lucky enough to get that one-on-one mentorship, someone who knows what they're doing to take you out in the forest, and I find that if you come to it with a genuine passion and you do it with, just a little bit of grace and humility, people are pretty receptive to it. I know the joke is that, oh, no one's ever going to want to show you their mushroom spots, and they probably would never take you to their really honeypot mushroom spots. But if you come to it that right attitude, I think people are happy to take you out and at least show you the ropes, maybe in a neutral ground, let's say. I think that's one of the best ways to learn. It activates all that ancestral DNA we have of foraging with others out in the woods and finding food out in the forest. That's some primal energy that it taps into, I think.
I always wondered at times, like, was my family or someone in my family part of this, like, explorer, science collecting, data collecting? Is there somewhere in my heritage where someone was collecting food, or big hunters or big fishermen? Like, where is this primal sense that I have so deep within me? Where in my history is that? Who did it in my history? My family links back to Italy on my mom's side, so maybe there were some serious mushroom pickers. Italy is huge in the mushroom forage community. Then my father's side, I mean, my father loved to go fishing. I grew up going out on a boat, and then his father was never around. My father eventually discovered his father living on a boat, traveling the Caribbean, fishing. So my father never knew his dad, but his dad was a huge fisherman too, just like he was, and he didn't even know this about his father. So that right there, it even showed me at a young age that, like, wow, this must be in the blood, like this is in the family, or this was back.
Well, and if you go far enough back, everyone's got those roots, right? That's how primal humans, how we developed. Yeah.
And you nailed it, exactly.
But you in particular have some adventure explorer spirit, which I'm not surprised by at all. We're talking a lot about Florida and the amazing ecosystem there, and I wanted to pick your brain about all that. But then why did you decide to make that move to the Pacific Northwest? Kind of when did that happen, and what spurred that move?
That is a huge question, and I love it because mushrooms.
Yeah.
Mushrooms. It is all about mushrooms. That is what brought me to the Pacific Northwest. I mean, we're on Mushroom Hour. This is what brought me here. Where did mushrooms come from? I'm always asked this question, like, why mushrooms? Where did this come from? It's not that where did it come from? It was always there for me. I remember watching Fantasia, the first Fantasia film on Disney when I was really young, and rewinding and replaying over and over the 1-minute clip of the dancing mushrooms. I thought they were the coolest little things. And then every movie after that I would watch, mushrooms stood out. Fern Gully, that's a beautiful story about conservation and protecting the forests, and there's mushrooms everywhere, and a lot of them are anatomically correct in the way that they're drawn. So it's really, really cool to see that in a cartoon, where in Fern Gully they did such a good job with their species that they're drawing in that. And then you go into, like, of course, everyone typically thinks it's Alice in Wonderland, or are you interested in psychedelic mushrooms, which was a horrible stigma to have when you're fascinated by mushrooms and seeing fungi everywhere, and you want to learn about it, but then you get this horrible stigma put on you that you are just want to eat mushrooms to party, or that's what you're interested, or you want to go find psychedelic mushrooms. It's kind of a damper, and you almost get turned off to even tell people you're interested in mushrooms at times because of that, one, that automatic stigma, but two, there's that mycophobia that comes with things too, people fearing mushrooms and, oh, it's all poisonous.
Right.
Food was my focus. It's always been my focus. So it was all about finding mushrooms that I could eat.
Right.
Making stuffed mushrooms with my mom was one of my favorite things growing up. I would always want her to make stuffed mushrooms, and I would be the one in charge to clean and prep the mushrooms because I loved touching them. I loved handling them. I loved doing all the work with them. But I couldn't learn about them in Florida. I went to college. My professor, it was the closest connection for me, taught our botany class. He had his degree in mycology, but wouldn't teach mycology and barely spoke about mushrooms in his class. So it was just strange. I would go to his office hours and then I would just like want to talk about mushrooms. But it was almost like he didn't like talking about it. So it was really a drive for me to like, I just really got to figure this out. I want to go forage for mushrooms. I want to go pick them. I want to eat them. I want to taste all of them. And what really took me over the edge was Instagram. That's really what took me over the edge. I was following this gal out here. I don't even think she has an Instagram anymore, but she was always posting photos of her going fishing on the coast and foraging for mushrooms. And I was just completely in awe. And I knew that it was the Mecca to learn about biodiversity and mushrooms. Of course, you know, Paul Stamets was out here. So in my young age of learning about fungi, Paul Stamets was the man, like so eloquently spoken, this well-educated human that knows so much about fungi, but he can also speak it really well to an audience in layman's terms to understand the vernacular that scientists use. So it was just, he was like the coolest human to me at that time, wanting to come to the Pacific Northwest. And I was like, all right, I'll be close to Paul Stamets. I'll be in Oregon. He's in Washington. That's close enough. I'm going to pick up on all that right here.
Right, right.
I told everyone, and I did attempt to try to go to grad school in Oregon. I told everyone that was the main reason I was coming here, because I didn't want family and friends to think I was crazy to just move here to learn about mushrooms.
I'm just moving to learn about mushrooms, guys. It's okay.
Yeah, and then I got involved pretty quickly. I jumped in a mushroom cultivation design course with Fungi for the People, which is a nonprofit in Eugene, Oregon. And they did like mushroom cultivation classes, and at the end they did a foray, and I went on a foray with them and went out in the woods and learned a lot about mushrooms that I didn't already know that were edible. One of them in really particular is Cataphilasma ventricosum, which is this really unique, big, stout mushroom that grows on the coast. And typically, no, people don't eat it because it doesn't smell good. It almost smells like Play-Doh. And some people don't like the texture because it's crunchy and chewy, but to me, it's got incredible texture. It takes on flavors really well. And I like mushrooms that have that nice, good crunch to them when you bite into them.
Right.
But anyways, back to coming to the Pacific Northwest, this was the Mecca. I needed to come here to learn about it. And in doing so, of course, I learned about foragings for plants out here too. And there's so much rich history recorded here on what plants were used, what mushrooms were used. And one thing I find is really interesting is that in the books that I've read for plant identification, every plant that is in there, if it had a use, it named the use of the indigenous tribe utilizing the plants, what the reasons for utilizing it was. Was it ceremonial? Was it for medicine? Was it for food? Was it used for in time of famine? And so this book just talks so much about plants. And then I was like, I wonder, were mushrooms used in indigenous tribes? And I cannot find much information about this. And it does not seem to be either information that was shared. I can't speak for them, but I do have friends that go work with indigenous tribes and are very connected with them. And there's a huge amount of respect that goes with the land. And some information it's called spoken word. Right. It's only to be spoken, not to be recorded, not to be written down, not to be documented. And so I'm curious, because of some of that spoken word that I've been given and I'm not able to talk about.
Yeah.
shows me that there might be so much more information out there, but so much is kept so sacred. And that to me is so cool. And it really makes me want to learn more and more about that.
I love that idea, and I think you're getting at the heart of something. It's one of the many reasons why fungi, and especially macrofungi like mushrooms, are so appealing. Is they're big and bold and everywhere. You can't ignore them when you're out in nature, but somehow the understanding of them isn't as well mapped out or as well defined as you'd think, especially when it comes to mushroom hunting. The varied uses and the varied edibility that differs across cultures, even though the mushrooms don't differ. It's like this tradition that does have that oral component that just today, the age of internet, feels so mysterious and kind of pulls you in, that idea that there's knowledge that you're not going to be able to find in a Google search. It's going to require you to really go and seek it. And there's something about that that I think is really appealing. There's just enough information to get you to the doorway, but then you don't know what's beyond that. So it kind of calls you in. And I think you just elucidated that really, really well. And we're talking about indigenous roots. We're talking about earlier about ancient roots of foraging. I mean, do you see foraging as a sacred practice? Do you think there's kind of a spiritual bond being developed as you do this practice and develop a bond with the land?
Yes, I do. And then there's times that I also don't because I'm distracted. So when I am focused and I'm listening to the land and I'm listening to nature and listening to what I've learned from others who work with folks who have been part of this foraging or wild foods or harvests for many years, just the amount of respect that is given to the land and to the resource that you are utilizing it's insurpassable. Like, it's unbelievable how much respect that there is for that. And then, I'll go out there and I love doing it, and I have this spiritual or this deep connection with it. And then there's times that once, I want to share information with people. So once that moment comes that I want to take out a phone, to take a photo, or to share information, or to log it, all of a sudden it just becomes something else. And so there's something about this information sharing that is great, but there's also something that's also like, it hides the value of what we're trying to go for.
Yeah, and it's hard to convey that awe and reverence through a video. I think in your practice seems to go hand in hand with being out in the woods. Is a necessary component is to have that awe and reverence for the natural environment that's bringing you all these things. I guess, how do you approach foraging in a way that really gives it that honor and respect to the ecology that's providing these things? Are there different techniques? And this can be, sustainability, but it can also be mindset and that kind of thing.
I think it really comes down to understanding what species of anything that you are working with. Some fruit trees will produce a lot of fruit where some might not fruit much at all. So you have to gauge on what resources available and utilizing your best judgment to make the right call. And sometimes I'll go to a spot and there's porcini everywhere, so much, and then you get rewarded with this like rush of feelings and excitement, and you go and pick, and then you pick, and then you pick, and you're like, I know I'm not hurting anything because the organism is living under the earth. This is their fruiting body. They're gonna thrive. They're there. It's trying to really calm down, which I can struggle with at times too, and I have this background of sustainability and environment, and you get on this high of these endorphins and everything that's going positive because you're receiving this reward of this hunter gatherer, and it's like being on a treasure hunt and you're getting rewarded every time you pick one. It's really trying to take a step back and look and, okay, do I have what is an okay amount? Am I going to utilize all of this? Is any of this going to go to waste? Waste is the big part. That should be your focus when you're foraging, is, am I going to waste some of this because I can't process it in time, or I can't eat it all in time? Do I have the resources to dehydrate it? Do I ferment? Do I utilize the array of things that you can use to have a little bit larger of a harvest and not have waste? That is my goal every time that I forage, is to have zero waste. when it comes to having a good forest product.
Right, because even if it's not hurting to take every single porcini that Scott stumbles upon, there is something to be said for leaving behind fruit bodies to continue dropping their spores, even just to keep that organic matter and the minerals and everything contained in that fruit body in that area of ecosystem. That's important to reconcile, because I know a lot of people, and I'm very much on the train of, hey, harvesting a mushroom doesn't hurt the environment, but there's benefit from leaving behind. You may not be hurting by taking it, but there's benefit from leaving some behind.
Well, and here, think of this. When you find a mushroom that is old, what do you notice on the inside?
Eaten by bugs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So and then bugs are then eaten by the next thing. And then there's your connection of why it's important to leave mushrooms behind, is because they might look like maggots to you and little bugs, but they are a resource of nutrients for other things in that environment.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And that is something that's overlooked a lot too, because it's also like you said, I'm taking a mushroom, I'm not doing any harm. Well, yeah, you're not hurting the fruiting body, but now you're leaving less resources for the next critter that wants to come by. It's not just the squirrel that takes a bite, or the bird that takes a poke, or the bird that's taking a poke is actually going for some of the larvae inside of that mushroom. It's really trying to envision everything that I do with foraging is envisioning the ecology of the entire landscape. You can't just think solely mushroom or solely fruit. You have to think the whole system. That's permaculture. Put that in my brain, because you have these different layers of your forest. You have your ground covers, you have your mushrooms, you have your tubers, you have your vines, your canopy, your understory, and your shrubs. All of those make that ecosystem. And how are they all connected? So taking that mushroom, what now have you taken from everything else that's in that whole ecosystem? And I just describe things that have to do with flora,
right?
Not even the fauna, and now put fauna in there, and then you've got all these other things that come into the ecosystem play.
I like that of permaculture as kind of a state of consciousness where you're more cognizant of the interconnection of all things and how each thing in an ecosystem is intimately connected. Thinking of that mindset that you have when you're out foraging, and I think at its best, us as foragers have that mindset. So we are being as sustainable as possible. We are being as reverent of the land as possible. How can you reconcile that maybe with commercial foraging?
That's also very touchy subject, because some people commercial harvest for their means of life, and this is where my understanding of many things in the modern world is, I can't say that someone's means of life is the wrong way.
Right.
That's even when it comes to conventional agriculture compared to organic agriculture. I can't say that conventional agriculture is a bad way because it changes someone's means of life. I had to learn this lesson really hard in Florida, because a lot of the agriculture and people that I work with were conventional farmers. But then if I tell them they're doing it the wrong way, then I'm telling them that their way of life is wrong, and then the way that they've been living their lives is the wrong way. So how do I communicate better to not tell them that their way of life is the wrong way? Obviously, you and I understand that certain things harm the environment,
right?
But someone's way of life is different than the way that it's affecting the environment.
Which in its own way is affecting a different kind of environment. And maybe it's about broadening their conversation with the ideas you're able to inform them with. And they can then implement, in the best case scenario, they can implement some of that and gradually make their practice a blend of both. Maybe a commercial forager could integrate a little more awareness about why he should leave some fruit bodies behind. It may make the day a little bit longer because he's got to find the next patch, but maybe ultimately that's what's best for everyone involved. So communication, it sounds like, is a big part of reconciling, the permaculture mindset you're so used to with established ways of life that maybe we think should shift more in the direction that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And it's that communication and change is hard for a lot of people. The commercial harvesting that goes on, it can do some serious harm to the forests. People will rake for truffles. They're raking up forest floor to go get truffles. And I'm going to say to everybody on here that if you ever go buy a truffle, Know how the truffle was harvested.
Mm.
Make sure, if you can, communicate to find out if those mushrooms were found by dogs or pigs only. And the reason being not only because of the sustainability factor, but the truffle that you buy from the store that you don't know where it came from may have been raked up, but they're going to throw a really ripe truffle that smells great in with those other unripe truffles in with the bag. And the aromatics from that ripe truffle are still going to sit on those unripe truffles. So the truffles you are now buying, you have quality and you have production from harvest of under-mature truffles. So you're not
Mm.
getting that quality mushroom anymore. So if you buy from someone for a truffle that only uses a dog or a pig, you're going to be guaranteed to have quality product in front of you, quality truffles in front of you, because they're not cheap. Everybody knows the truffles are very expensive.
Right.
So then you're not only just caring about the environment, but you're also caring about the quality of the product that you're spending your dollars on. That alone, typically, if you can relate money to something for people, they care about the environment a little bit more, especially if it's going to help them save a couple dollars.
It's almost like is this little bit of a, I like to call it the curse of consciousness around these things, because suddenly you apply that lens of critical analysis, seeing where things come from, the practice used to derive it. You start seeing everything through that lens, and it kind of limits or restricts what you do out in the world. You start having to make informed choices. It's like, oh, I know I like can't, I can't buy that truffle anymore because I know what they did to destroy the environment. And I think that some of that new reality that becomes your reality is maybe what gives people hesitancy to going all the way sometimes. They're like, well, I don't want to suddenly have to view the entire world through that lens. That makes a lot of change. It's an interesting dynamic for sure.
Yeah, commercial forest products are a very uncomfortable subject, but it's because we need to talk about it at times. These are things that have to come up. There's a lot of uncomfortable conversations happening, and so it's just time to bring some of those things to light at times.
We're talking about uncomfortable conversations. One thing you brought up that made me a little bit uncomfortable was talking about how you do have to hold things back when you teach people about wild food, when you teach people about foraging. And you said it earlier in this conversation, there are certain things that can only be passed out orally. You don't want to just blast it out and share it with the world. And I'm very much, get people in love with nature, get people to develop a relationship with wild food. But why is it that a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing? And why do we have to be a little more careful with how much we promote everyone getting out there and hunting wild food, in your mind?
Yeah, this is a really big struggle for me a lot of times, especially because my social media has grown in the way that it has. And now that I have an audience, watching the information that I put out is it's a very delicate dance for me,
Mm.
because I want to keep people engaged. I want them to love nature. I want them to care about it. I want people to know more about their diets and their food and their access to those foods that surround them. At the same time, the amount of years that I've spent doing all of this, you really develop this deep understanding of the importance of this knowledge, but as well as the importance of protecting the knowledge as well. It is very sacred information. I want you to be inspired by nature. I want you to forage, but I want it all to be done mindfully,
Mm.
not just to go out to get a photo because it's trendy,
Mm.
not just to go do it because it's cool to go do it. It's a lifestyle that I've developed. Not to say that everybody needs to have the lifestyle that I have, but having that outlook of look at the ecology, look at the way everything ties together, look at the lands that you're foraging in. What are the lands surrounding it? How much has been utilized? Yes, it's okay for me to take some food from here, but sharing information is so valuable for all of us. But the resources, the tangible resources that we have, are depleting. We know this in many ways. Yes, Oregon is viewed as this very green state, but they do clear cuts all the time still. Our state is still being clear cut, where this is not something that you see because they put the clear cuts behind the pretty roads where there's a little bit of forest blocking as a barrier, and you drive a little bit away and all of a sudden all these forests are cut down. And
Wow.
you can see that Driving from Portland just to the Oregon coast through the Tillamook National Forest, there is so much clear cut, and you can actually see it from the road. What I really want is to have people care about the environment. Having access to this food is great, but if you don't care about it and you don't want to protect it for our generation, future generations, then why are we doing it? Showing this love for the food is to show love for the land, and to really, really have this deep appreciation so that we can make a difference and plant trees or learn permaculture techniques. And that's the idea that I want to make the goal for everyone, is to understand permaculture as well as foraging. Don't just go into this to be a forager. Go into this to learn about permaculture and what that means to understand agroforestry, because you don't want to utilize all of your resources for food to just come from the forests. You need to utilize your landscape at the house. Planting ornamentals is pretty, but planting ornamentals is not doing you a benefit. If you have the land or you have a yard, plant something that grows food for you. Even low maintenance. Permaculture is all about low maintenance. So if you can't do it all the time, it's a lot of work at first to get things established, but once it's going, then you've got food for the rest of your life if you've done it. Then, if you're bringing all these other resources in from your home landscape, going to the forest, you're not going to maybe take as much. You're not going to utilize as much as you need from the forest for foraging. The idea of this is to be agrocentric. Your mind and your society and way of life is to focus around food. And how can you access that food in every way possible? And that possibility includes growing it yourself.
I really like that idea that the more you can bring in these native things that you may find in the wild, in the woods, these native food sources, the ones that you can, cultivate them at home. That's one small step to make sure they remain out in the forest. And obviously with mushrooms, as much as I want to be able to inoculate oak trees with chanterelle and inoculate our pines with porcini, we can't do that yet. But the things that you can, bring them in. And then do you think there's an onus on people who educate then? And I mean, even just people who have a voice on social media that share foraging, do you think there is some onus to communicate that greater appreciation or that greater understanding of the implications to ecology?
Absolutely. And I myself have not been very good at communicating it as much as I feel it inside of me on my social media platform. And I think a lot of that has to come down to trust.
Yeah.
And it's about not per se me trusting my audience, but my audience trusting me. Because who am I, some guy online, to tell them that they need to have better environmental sustainability techniques or better foraging techniques or better food techniques or practices? Who am I to do this? And so building trust has been honestly the second biggest goal of Woodland Cravings with everybody, is one, to show you food, but also to build your trust so that in time, when I feel that I am trusted, I can have a bigger voice to stand up for this environmental initiative that I feel deep within me. And I have a very big project that is in development. It's not something I'm able to speak of yet. It might take years. I need a very strong team to work on something. But this is the environmental initiatives that I want to take forth. I need to establish my level of trust with everyone. To me, I think of it as a game of chess. You know, it's like being strategic, and also going back to foraging, it's also being strategic with what you share as information. A phrase that was said to me many years ago is, wisdom is not always being the one to speak, but wisdom is when you know not to speak.
That was a unique perspective I hadn't heard before. And clearly I'm very much in the probably speak too much category. And, you know, made me think of crafts or trades where there's like an apprentice structure where you kind of have to learn how to do this thing properly. And before we talked about that one-on-one learning as kind of the best route. So how do we get this awareness more widespread? And for people who already have deep roots in foraging, you know, they don't have to be commercial foragers, but people that just forage a lot, even recreationally, how do we help move the needle so we're more in this permaculture, ecological mindfulness type of mindset when we go out in the forest without being too preachy?
And that's a really good question, and I hope you figure out the answer. No. I'm kidding. I will say that when I've gone out on hikes and walks with others, this information that I'm saying, no one really speaks up about this stuff in many ways. It's all about what are we foraging, what are we going for, what is the edibility. The ethical side of things really don't come up.
Right.
When I lead my talks, ethics are one of the first things I talk about before I even go on. We stand there, and I know everyone's anxious and they want to go learn about the things that they can eat because they're going to spend this hour with me, and now we're hanging out for 10 minutes and we're talking ethics. But that is part of the patience. They're learning knowledge that you want to understand, and kind of forcing that into our teachings is really important, because it's not something that I was really ever taught to the degree. I mean, like I said, in my university, we didn't even know about agriculture. We weren't being taught about agriculture. This is all self-taught. And I want to do the best that I can to teach others, but a lot of it's also going to come from within them. It's going to come from within yourselves to really start feeling and developing, because I don't have all the answers. I can't give you all the answers. I don't know them all. I just have my perspective and my viewpoints, and might vibe with you, it might not. At least starting when I do my guided hikes and walks, is I preface things with sustainability, ecology, and trying to paint the big picture and not just the focused picture that we're about to go see by looking at these mushrooms or looking at these plants that we can go and forage for. Right. It's such a big subject, and I get so hyped and excited to talk about it, and I have to like calm myself down at times.
Well, it's a subject that I think is becoming more and more important as more people get into foraging. I think it's easy to pay lip service to it. I'm a victim of that as much as anyone else. It's easy to pay lip service without actually applying it once you're out there in the adrenaline rush of finding stuff. But I think one of the really important things is when you say something, it can't be unheard. So at least having these conversations, at least having your 10-minute preface plants the seed in someone so they can then have that unfold like it did within you in its own unique, organic way that changes their viewpoint and probably pushes them more towards an ethical awareness somewhat. So as much as I was hoping Scott would have this all-encompassing answer for how do we implement this, the kind of tougher, harder answer is it's going to take a lot of time and having a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody were to tell you right now, your viewpoint is wrong, you need to do it this way instead, you're like, whoa, hold on.
My walls go up.
Hold on. What did you say? So I like that you said planting a seed or dropping some spores.
Dropping some spores. I like it. I like it.
You got to inoculate. It takes time.
In this vein, do you feel like there is also, and this probably, goes hand in hand, but it's something that I've been hearing more and more about, is how do we reconcile developing a relationship with the land where there are indigenous peoples? How do we honor indigenous tradition, indigenous culture? Is it simply having this awareness, like that's at the center of it? Or are there any specific steps you or the communities that you're in that have involvement with indigenous groups? Are there any specific steps or things that we can do to better honor that tradition and the fact that there are indigenous peoples that have used these lands?
First and foremost, I really wish that I had an indigenous person to speak in this regard, because this is not my voice that should be heard to say what is right and what is wrong in this area. But what I have been advised and taught from those is that if you are foraging in an area and you see indigenous people, sometimes it might be the best gesture to just leave and let them have that space.
Right.
That can be sometimes the best gesture, is to just leave the space, making acknowledgement that they are there, and letting them have that time with their family or foraging with their friends, and whatever it may be, is to recognize it, acknowledge it. And if you don't leave, acknowledge them. Don't have this barrier of like, oh, I'm in this spot first and they came here, and I'm foraging this, and you get that defensiveness that comes up when you see other foragers.
Right.
Really think about it for a moment and observe the situation, and maybe just a hello, or the biggest thing to do is to just let them have their space. And that can be difficult, but it's one of the things that I have been advised by my friends numerous times when we do some of our very big harvests, is to just be very aware of the locals and be very aware of the indigenous. And if they're there, use your best wisdom.
I love that piece of advice. And obviously no one here is speaking for indigenous communities at all, but as the voice of someone who comes from a European background, that's useful advice or useful rules of thumb that you use that maybe can translate into other folks' practices. So I did want to touch on that, and I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Like I had mentioned, there's foods that have been shared with me and harvest lands that have been shared with me. The amount of respect that goes into it is something that I am still learning how to comprehend and to feel and to love.
Yeah, and it's an invitation for others to start that journey as well. So that's why I really appreciate you being willing to just bring up these topics. It's something that I too am trying to implement and get better at, and I think we all are. So I love hearing your perspective about it. Bringing it back to something a little lighter, but something that's huge in terms of your relationship with foraging and a lot of people's relationship with foraging, I did want to wrap things up with a discussion of food, because I want to know, for you, are wild foods like a pretty huge part of their diet? Are they kind of augmenting your diet? And then maybe just a couple recipes or a couple plants or mushrooms that you really love, and maybe some general tips on how to prep them.
Now I'm getting hungry. Just thinking about it. Like I said, food has been part of my life, like all of you. It's there every day. And these wild foods, they augment my diet. They are part of my diet. They are not my complete and full diet. One, I don't think that would be sustainable if foraged foods were completely my diet.
Right.
I don't think that, because I have to still grow my food. I have to still grow things. So it should not be my full diet. And there's plenty of things that we can't grow, like rice. We don't have access to rice. So I have to go and buy certain things from the stores. We all do. There's the foods that I like to cook a lot. My kind of go-to meal is, I'm a huge kind of a rice bowl advocate. I love fresh rice bowls.
Yeah.
And, I do ferments a lot. So I make homemade kimchi, and I'm doing a lot of lacto ferments, and I dehydrate fruits and berries, and I dehydrate a lot of mushrooms. I do oil cured mushrooms with different spices, and pack those and can them. So those all become part of that rice bowl, because then I've got all these like prepared, cured foods or dried fruits. And so it's my rice, my fresh greens. I love my veggies and I love my fresh greens. I throw a bunch of those other concoctions, from the mushrooms to the fermented kimchi and all that in the rice bowl. I love making sprouts. I sprout a bunch of beans. I do mung beans and lentils. I'll sprout those and get them going. And then a good old poached egg right on top. That's kind of the sauce for everything. And I make dressings all the time too. But my go-to meal is a rice bowl. I can eat a rice bowl for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I'd be happy every single day, because you can alter them. It's like a create your own salad, but you have rice with it too.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can be on the same page with that. I can do the rice bowl every day of the week for sure. I love hearing about your different treatments, though, of certain wild plants and wild mushrooms. That's something I'm trying to dabble in a little bit more, is that idea of fermenting. What are some other preparations or ways that you can use your mushrooms other than just sauteing them fresh? What are some of those ways that you can make them delicious, preserve them, and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, there's a really incredible recipe that I follow. It's by Hank Shaw. He's also a well-known forager. He's got a blog, and it's Italian cured mushrooms. And the process goes, you get your chanterelles or you get your porcinis, and you want to get them when they're firm. You don't want to get them when they're much older and they get softer and pillowy and all these, very airy to them. You want them to be dense mushrooms. I recently did it with lyophilum, the fried chicken mushrooms.
Oh, yeah.
Because those are really dense and they can hold their texture really well.
Right.
So you get the mushrooms, you put them on a sheet tray, you throw a bunch of salt on them, and you let them wick out all the salt. The salt is going to just desiccate them. And then let them sit like that for like 2 hours. And then you drain off all the liquid, move as much salt off of them as you can. And then you sit at your table and you get your towel, like a kitchen towel. You put a couple mushrooms on the kitchen towel, you fold it over, you press the mushrooms. Not too hard, because you don't want to break them and squish them, but you want to press them to get more of the liquid out.
Right.
Then you take all those mushrooms, you toss them into boiling vinegar, and you want to make sure that they're all submerged under the vinegar. But you boil all of them for about 4 to 6 minutes. Take them all off of that, strain them, press them all again. You're going to want to let them cool because they'll be really hot, but press them all again. Get as much moisture as you can out. Then you set them out on another tray and let them sit out and air dry for about 12 to 24 hours. You don't want them to get like leathery, but you want them to be, just before they get leathery. Then you throw them into a bowl. You toss in some olive oil, lemon zest. You could do a little bit of chili spices. I do whole chili pods, dried ones, not fresh ones, dried ones. Mm. And then you'll also use maybe some Italian seasoning. I think that's what this is, again, pretty strictly along Hank Shaw's recipe from his website. And pack it in the jars, and then you seal them. He says to keep them in the fridge, but if you're good at canning and jarring, you can seal them and make sure you do it properly and put them in storage for 6 months. And the longer you let them sit in that cure, and then the better they taste. So it's about having some patience too. You forage, you eat all your fresh stuff, and then I have one of my jars in the fridge right now, and I've got like 6 more packed away for later use. It's a labor of love, and a lot of the food storage, it becomes a labor of love, and that's how you focus on not having waste again, is by dedicating. When I go forage, and if I'm like, all right, I'm gonna take my legal limit today. I'm gonna go to what my legal limit is. And that's a big thing too, is understanding that, because a lot of forests have legal limits on what you're allowed to leave with, and you have to get different permits per forest. Just to touch on that real quick.
Yeah, that's important.
When you forage, you want to also think, okay, well, am I going to be in the kitchen for the next 4 days because I need to use this, all of it, before it goes bad?
Right.
How much time do I have to dedicate to processing this? It's a big commitment to forage for mushrooms, especially because they tend to go quickly. They don't have a long shelf life. I also like to dehydrate my mushrooms, because that's kind of the easiest processing technique, is to slice them 1/2 inch thin and throw them in the dehydrator. If you have a dehydrator that has a temperature gauge, that's better, because if you get your standard ones that you get at the store, they're usually one temperature. You just turn it on and off. That's not the right temperature for dehydrating mushrooms. You're going to over dry them, or they're going to get a little burnt even in there. Or there's uneven dehydration. So I have an Excalibur. They're a little pricier, but I do really like the Excalibur. It's 9 trays. You have a temperature gauge. And I think there's even more modern ones where you can set a timer so you don't even over dry, because sometimes I can fall into I let that run for a little too long. And then another technique for storing mushrooms is sauteing and then freezing.
Oh, okay.
You par cook them. You can get them cooked a little bit and saute, and then throw them in the freezer. And that way you can use them. Recently, someone had informed me that, and I gave it a try. I haven't eaten them yet. They're in my freezer now. But if you get porcinis when they're good-sized buttons and there's no bugs in them, they're completely clear, you can throw them in the freezer whole, not even have to do anything with them. Now, I don't know how well it holds the texture of it. Right. It might be just for being used for sauces and stocks or gravies. I attempted it to give it a shot. It was told to me by someone who does a lot of foraging. I believe that this friend is a commercial forager.
This is really something I wanted to get into with you, because it's that other half of foraging that people don't think about. Even though I get the question a lot of, what do you do with all your mushrooms? It's like, yeah, that's almost more work than actually finding them sometimes, just to actually make use of all this fungal abundance that you have is to actually make use of it. And I have to second that on the Excalibur. That's the best investment I ever made when it comes to mushroom foraging. Was getting a good dehydrator. And there are certain mushrooms I find, like porcini, I kind of prefer them almost once they're dehydrated. Can concentrate that flavor and even can change, my like basic level of cookery, even can change how I then prepare them and the texture that they give and everything else. So yeah, I just wanted to outline that process with someone who is such a foodie like you, who is so experienced with wild foods, just to outline some ways we can get creative with what we find out in the woods.
Yeah, and I guess we never touched on the food thing. Is I've been a part of the service industry since I was 14 years old. So that's
oh wow, okay.
Years I've been in restaurants for a very long time, and I've never been working as the chef in a restaurant. I've always been the service man on the front side, salesman, But I was always in the kitchen, hanging out with the chefs, and almost all the restaurants that I worked in, especially in the finer dining places, I hit it off with the chefs. I mean, I just was always with the chefs in the kitchen, hanging out as the service guy that should be out on the floor. Why are you hanging out with the chefs so much? You need to get back out there with the people. You guys.
But I love the food.
Yeah, but I love the food, and I love giving ideas. I would show up in Florida, especially since I had access to so much tropical fruit and foraging for feral fruit trees. I would just, when things were ripe, there was so much rotting on the floor. I would just take what I could from the trees, and then I'd bring them to all the kitchen crew and let them eat them all in the kitchen and just have them to the guys in the back or girls in the back, whatever. Just, it was always rewarding to just kind of show up with all this food for everybody that worked in the kitchen. And then whatever's left over, the front of the house staff can have some.
Now that's an interesting one, is that relationship of wild foods with the restaurant industry and how those things link together. And that's probably a podcast for another time, but that was kind of the hot thing, especially made popular by Noma overseas. Do you see a lot more chefs and restaurants trying to integrate seasonal wild food?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's a huge part of the food diversity and community, and a huge inspiration for me to kind of focus on food even more was once the Netflix series Chef's Table came out.
Yes.
I mean, Virgilio over in Central in Peru was just this huge inspiration. That was a incredible usage of food, because as a chef, what he does is he looks at an ecosystem. Hey, wait, that's what I do. I look at an ecosystem.
Right.
But he creates this food dish based on the entire ecosystem, and he pulls things from each part of it. And then not only that, he actually artistically puts together the landscape of that ecosystem as the dish. My mind was blown. Like, incredible. So the way that the food culture is utilizing wild foods, I think, is great, especially if there is a focus on the environment, which is what Virgilio did. And I thought it was the neatest. Chef's Table was the one from Peru.
That reverence can carry through from collection all the way to preparation and that final delivery. You can carry through this reverent consideration of the environment and of the ecology from which it comes from. And I think everyone involved is all the better for it.
Absolutely, yeah. And if anybody wants to be inspired by something food related like that, the episode of Chef's Table, again, Virgilio, his restaurant's name is Central. He works with his sister, who developed her own research lab for the collection of botanical species for protection of the forest as well. So not only are they doing things for food, but they're doing things for the environment. And his sister has this like science background. They're just a huge inspiration on their viewpoint of food and how food should be viewed in our everyday lives.
I was about to ask about your future plans next, but it sounds like you're probably, if your past pursuit of your passions is any indication, we're probably going to find you in Peru trying to work at Central in the near future.
Who knows? I don't know. I've working there maybe, but I think I'd have way more fun working with his sister.
Yeah.
Exploring and collecting plants and things for food and understanding all that. And then I'll just go hang out with Virgilio and eat his food. How about that?
Go bug him in the kitchen and eat food with him and share ideas.
Work trade,
Hey, that doesn't sound bad to me. And it's cool because that gives a really good model of how common industries that benefit from wild food can really work in maintaining those ecosystems. It provides a really good model for how these things can all come together, and that environmental consideration can run all the way through, and it still can be successful economically. great example, and we'll put that in the show notes. But yeah, I guess in this time of flux, I know you have some top secret other projects you're working on, so I don't want to try to pry that out of you. But are there any near-term plans, anything in the future that you're excited about you want to share with us?
That is a really also big question because so much in the world has changed for all of us.
Right.
That future plans are just, there's these dreams and goals and visions. I'm projecting, if I am able to, there are going to be 3 months in the coming year that I'm going to try and travel, but domestically, because that's what I do. I travel domestically solely for my dog. I got to keep her with me. Doing international travel, one is, even before our current times, I didn't do international travel because I am here for my dog. She is my best friend, so that kind of, there's no...
Puka is like your partner in crime.
She is my complete partner in crime. She's that companion, and so I don't go anywhere without her. So it's just, I drive everywhere. I've driven all across the country. That's why I've foraged in so many different states, is because anytime I travel, it's by vehicle, it's by camping, it's by driving. So right now, leaving the Pacific Northwest in the wintertime sounds very attractive because it's been a very mild summer here, and I would really enjoy a little more sun. So I'm going to enjoy the fall season, and then I might venture, and who knows, I might disappear for 3 months and just not even have a presence somewhere, or I might be here sharing stuff in wild foods or come back with a lot of fun stuff. But the idea of having that as an option, if said world allows it, the goal is to kind of get back on the road. I need that travel time. I'm realizing, while I do like to have a home base, have a house where I can grow my fruits and vegetables and do all this stuff, I need to have that freedom to travel and meet with other foragers. And I mean, I've hit 18 states. I got a whole bunch of other states to go to still learn about foraging in different areas. So the dream would be to forage in every single state.
Yeah.
And meet foragers from each of those states, take photographs, and to work more on developing a YouTube and kind of sharing this adventure with people. So that's kind of the future plan, is to just do more foraging. I would love to see more permaculture farms around the country as well, permaculture gardens, people's properties that have been focused on permaculture. And if I can hit a rad food forest in every single state as well, that'd be really incredible too, because that's tying those two worlds together to really better understand each of those.
Yeah. Well, and without breaking the moment too much, if you can document all that stuff, I think we'd all be in for a treat to see that voyage as well.
The dream goal would be to do so. Whether I unplug so that I can get the best content that I can during those times of travel, rather than doing the Insta of the Instagram. It's a delicate dance to love nature and want to be out there, to have to be in touch with technology to the degree that we have to at times. It's a challenge. Developing ideas to get my website up and running better, as well as the future thing. And then I'd like to have an actual map of bioregions and dedicate information to bioregions based upon the map on the website. So that's just an idea for resources, but I'm not doing it. Maybe someone else is, and I just don't know about it. But yeah, just having some access to information, again, is good. But giving away, that's why I said bioregion. I didn't say particular state. Bioregion can encompass a whole area, because I want all of you to do research. I want all of you to become so intimate with everything. You take the time to do the research. You take the time to understand where something might grow, how it grows, what season it is, because just by doing that research, you're already becoming inoculated. You're already letting those seeds sprout. You're already becoming entangled in this ecology. But if I just gave you the answer, that entanglement hasn't happened. I've given you the fruit already without allowing this growth to develop within. So vagueness is good, because vagueness challenges you.
Potent concept. That is, I like that. I'm going to try that on for size. Giving just enough information. Like I said before, you give just enough information to get someone into that world of mystery, and then let them chart their own path, because that's really the best way people learn.
Absolutely.
And doing that self-discovery. I love that. Well, I guess where can people find you then to follow, these journeys into bioregions or whatever else you're doing? Where can people find you?
Instagram is the best platform. That is my go-to. Woodland Cravings. I have an email address, woodlandcravings@gmail.com. So if anybody wants to contact me more on a professional level or have serious inquiries, that's the best way to get my response. DMs are hard to get by on Instagram, so I will get to some, but that's a hard way to communicate. Then there's the website in development. It's an old website, but website in development. So it's also woodlandcravings.com. And I have a TikTok, but who knows what's happening with TikTok these days?
That's true. I did hear they were going to potentially shut it down in the US.
Yes. So learn about permaculture, learn about foraging, learn about ecology, do your research, and remember, be vague with information at times. It's not a horrible thing.
And follow Scott so you can live through his vicarious adventures and hang out with Puka, because that's what we do. A couple wrap-up questions that I like to ask all my guests. What is a mushroom that you love and why? This can be one we've already talked about. It doesn't have to be a favorite. It could just be the mushroom that sprang into your head when I said that. But a mushroom that you love and why?
Hericium. Anything to do with hericium. I love it as a food. I love the potential medicinal benefits of it. I think that as a mushroom, it is probably one of the tastiest of the foods for me too. So anything of the Hericium genus, your lion's mane, your bear's tooth head, those are all mushrooms that I wish that I had more of in my life because I don't have as much of them. We get them here, but I just still want more. And
never can have too many.
Yeah, so that's I'd have to say my favorite mushroom when it comes to food. Can I give you a strange one?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Clathrus ruber, the lattice stinkhorn. That brings me back to my childhood. It's this weird soccer ball that shows up in your mulch beds. Yeah. And it's all white, and then you go out a couple days later and you smell this rotting animal. And you're like, wait a minute. Oh, there's flies all over that thing. Whoa, what's this cool thing? So the lattice stinkhorn is probably one of my favorite finds down in South Florida.
There is a rumor from a veteran forager. I mean, Ken Litchfield in the Bay Area is kind of a legend when it comes to mycology and everything else. And he insists that the red cage, before it emerges, when it is that soccer ball, is edible. And he's an advocate of slicing that and eating it. It says it tastes like bacon. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard that or if you've been that adventurous. I have not been.
I have heard of edibility of the stinkhorns in general. So the lattice stinkhorn, I have heard of that being edible. I have not ventured into tasting it. Not to say that I wouldn't do it.
Right.
Honestly, I trust only one person with trying new mushrooms, and that's Leah Mycelia or Leah Bentlin on Instagram. She's my go-to gal. Leah, is this safe? Leah, can I do this? Leah, are you going to be available to do this with me? Because I'm not going to do it alone.
Right.
I'm adventurous to some degree, but with trying new stuff, I tend to trust my mycologist experts.
And when Ken brings that up, as much as he's a mycologist expert, he's also part mushroom, and things that are safe for him, I'm sure, are not safe for other people somehow. So I've still touched that one with a grain of salt, but I was curious if you'd ever.
Absolutely. And just to go to that for one more thing, an important safety thing with foraging is I got extremely ill from eating a mushroom that's edible to most people. And I got very, very ill from one.
Which mushroom?
Actually reporting it to a poison study. The half-free morel. Okay. I had consumed maybe 8 of them, and they're not even a thick walled mushroom. The half-frees are very, very thin. And I ate it, no problem, fine. Went out on a little walk at a park with some friends. Came back home. It was 2 hours later. I ended up having a cider, and I drank 4 ounces of this alcoholic cider. And within 15 minutes, I became extremely nauseous. Very, very nauseous, far more than I've ever experienced in my life. And then my roommates were like, wow, you're turning really red. I started flushing red. I became super sensitive to smells and sounds to where it made me feel like I was spinning. And I, of course, contacted Leah immediately. And I was like, Leah, I'm not doing well. She's like, okay, well, this can happen for some people. And you'll be okay. You just gotta have to ride it out. Try and drink water if you can. I actually made a whole Instagram post about the experience. I even data tracked timing of my symptoms of what was happening at 4 o'clock, what was happening at 6 o'clock, what was happening at 7:30, and then what happened into the evening as I was trying to fall asleep. So it was a very healthy reminder of, even though something is said to be edible,
Right.
my body said no, in conjunction with alcohol. And so sometimes you might be able to eat, say, regular morels all the time, and then you never had a glass of wine with it, you never had some alcohol with it, and all of a sudden you get really sick. So alcohol has adverse effects with some mushrooms, but some mushrooms just had adverse effects with each of our bodies too.
That's a really important thing, and that's why when anyone asks me about any kind of wild mushroom, the rule of thumb is you try, one like half-inch little segment, even if it's something you've seen on Instagram, it's the right one, it's edible. Try a little tiny piece and wait 24 hours. It's always my thing. If you've never had that mushroom from the wild before, because I've known people that have porcini allergies, that are allergic to shiitake, you just can never tell. So wow, what a good cautionary tale for people to hear. Definitely. Now, this is kind of a more broad question. You can go anywhere you want with this, but what has a relationship with fungi or mushrooms given to you, brought to your life, maybe change your perspectives? But what has a relationship with fungi given to you?
I think that my relationship with fungi has just given me this far deeper understanding of ecology, of how the forests interact. The whole picture of ecology would not be the same had fungi and mushrooms not been there. So mushrooms really kind of opened that reality of how much more intricate this system is than we might see on that surface layer of information. So my relationship with mushrooms are not just about food, but again, it goes back to ecology, and it's just the understanding of a forest ecosystem or grassland or anywhere you'll find fungi, which is all over the land masses. So it just kind of deepens the web and deepens the wow, this is there's a lot of information here. There's a lot going on, more so than just these forests.
Yeah, well, it does seem to permeate everything on this planet in one way or another, between mycelium and spores and exo.
I mean, as I just touch my countertops, I'm thinking man, I'm probably leaning on some spores just because they're blowing through the house because the windows are open and we're literally on everything.
Yeah, it can't help but change your view of ecology. So that makes a lot of sense. And then what is the lasting impact you hope to have with your work, the collection of what you do and spreading knowledge and sharing information? And this doesn't have to be personal. This could be like a movement you help contribute to or something like that. But what do you hope the lasting contribution of your work is?
Land conservation. Land conservation with the access of utilizing lands as a resource for people in a non-commercial way. This is the ultimate goal, is to have a big protection over certain areas of lands. And while I do believe in, our freedoms and all that, and I don't believe in a huge government at times, so I want to make sure things are managed properly, because we need to have access to these. And so I'm not trying to say that, the government should go and buy and protect all these lands, but we as a collective should protect these lands and find a way to protect these lands.
Powerful idea, and it really does all come back to space or to land when you're talking about safe places to live out our lives, especially when you talk about adopting any kind of alternative viewpoints than the predominant cultural paradigms that we exist in right now. The only way you can make something new is having the space to do it. So I love that distinction of having space open for non-commercial purposes, just to live and be and exist and commune. That's a hugely important idea.
And with land, we didn't talk about water, but water goes with it. So yeah, that's kind of the big goal, is protecting the resources and protecting it and making it accessible to people, for everyday people, for taking care of our own health, our bodies, and the lands that surround us.
The most important thing in the world, and a noble goal, to be sure. Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, sharing yourself with me and all the listeners of Mushroom Hour. I talk with so many people about these things, and I'm always amazed how different viewpoints come to light, different perspectives. I learn so much more from each conversation. So I just appreciate you being open and sharing with us, or maybe just open enough to make us curious without being too specific. But thank you for coming on the show.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. It's been great.